This is Peter Hallen with Public Access Michiana, and tonight we have the opportunity to talk with Joe Bock, and the election is coming right up. And Joe, I mean, you got a half an hour, you got a busy schedule.
Right, I'm looking forward to the show.
Okay, and Robert Smith is with us. We were planning on talking about our trip that we took to Grand Rapids, Kalamazoo, and Battle Creek and to see the public access stations there.
Right.
And we're going to get to that because you're going to be able to stay a half an hour. I guess it just came out that you had the debate with Kathy Walarski.
With Congresswoman Jackie Walarski. That's right, last night.
Okay, and that was way down south there. I mean,
right, in Wabash.
Okay, and there wasn't any real debate. I mean, you guys didn't disagree on something. I mean, it wasn't like the Lincoln-Douglas debate kind of thing.
Well, it wasn't formatted that way. We were provided with a series of questions, and we responded to the questions. It wasn't formatted as a Lincoln-Douglas debate.
Okay. Now, from what I've seen, and I know you want to mention, your positions on the issues that are important to the people in the area.
Sure.
But I was getting looking on some blogs and some emails that there is a somewhat of a difference of opinion regarding your Middle East policy and Jackie's.
I don't know if there's a difference of opinion. I think there's people who know really what's going on and people who are uninformed. And there is a problem of people who are misleading others with that, just like Congresswoman Walarski often does with her ads. This is a group of her supporters misleading people, and that's consistent with the way that her campaign has been running their affairs.
Now, this blog with the rabbi, she starts out her blog, Indiana congressional race, pro-Israel incumbent Walarski against pro-terror candidate Joe Bock. And
that's absurd.
It sounds pretty strong. Professor Bock openly exclaims injustices towards Palestinians, acknowledging the systematic terrorism Palestinians have engaged in. Bock advocates preaching the word, a Catholic social doctrine that applies biblical justice to the Palestinians. Bock was assigned country representative for Catholic Relief Services, CRS Jerusalem West Bank Gaza program, and settled in East Jerusalem for 3 years, ending just before the Second Intifada. Bock's wife, Susan Leike, who is also outspokenly anti-Israel, has written, I learned that Christians shouldn't sit on the fence when Israel injustice is at play. So You've had 3 years experience. That's pretty interesting.
Right, yeah. I guess one thing I want to point out is that I was, when I was in Jerusalem, I taught at Hebrew University. I was a visiting professor there, teaching in the evenings. My main job was with Catholic Relief Services.
I saw that on the University of Notre Dame.
Right. So, just at the very beginning here, would Hebrew University, someone on their faculty who was anti-Israel, who was pro-terrorist? Absolutely not. That's an Israeli institution. It's a very highly regarded institution, and I was a visiting professor in the International Relations Department. I had an agreement with the Israeli government and worked very closely with the Israeli government on our programs, and I worked closely with the Palestinian Authority. And that's one of the reasons I'm running for this office, because I know how to make things work when you have people with very different worldviews. To infer that either my wife or I are anti-Israeli is really a leap of logic. It is false. And the idea that a person can't stand up for what is right when something wrong is what that author is saying. The illegal settlements that the Israelis continue to allow is a very big challenge for the peace process. I don't believe it does the Israelis any good. I certainly know that it doesn't do the Palestinians any good. So there are certain groups in this country that feel like any criticism of Israel is anti-Israel and even anti-Semitic. That isn't true. I'm a big supporter of Israel. I support their right to exist as a nation state. I support their need, the need for the Jewish people to have a place to go to. The Jewish people have been discriminated against. They've been treated horribly by the world to the point of genocide. So they need a place to go to. And I certainly support the state of Israel, their right to exist. I believe that the expansion or creation of illegal settlements is detrimental to the Israelis as well as to the Palestinians.
I think a lot of Jews around the world are also upset.
Right, they are. They are. There are some who feel that if you're a non-Jew, if you're a Christian like I am, and you speak up about it, well, then you're not their supporter. Well, that's not really true, and it's not really fair to make those accusations. Right.
If you were Jewish and you made the same claim, it wouldn't look so bad.
Well, they would look at you as a dissenter or something else. But a lot of people don't realize a lot of the Palestinians that are being hurt by this are not just Muslims, they're also Christians, the direct descendants from the Jews who were converted as Christ himself. I mean,
right,
a lot of
they're Semitic.
Right. And so what I'm saying is that a lot of untruths are being propagated. Congresswoman Walarski is misleading the voters, just like she has misled the voters about my bipartisan votes of 22 years ago. She leads people to think that I just recently moved here to run for Congress, which is absurd. I've been on the teaching faculty at Notre Dame for close to 8 years. And her ads are misleading. This piece, this blog is misleading. In fact, it's outrageous.
Right, because they're not speaking for all Jewish people to begin with.
No,
that rabbi.
No. In fact, there is a very thoughtful group of Jews that have formed something called the J Street organization.
Right, and it's a counter to, well, the book by Mearsheimer and Walt.
I don't know the book. I've heard of it before.
But it's called the Israeli Lobby, and they argued that the Iraqi war invasion by us was mainly pushed through by the Israeli Lobby, and that was the professor from Harvard and University of Chicago, Mearsheimer and Walt. And the J Street idea, I understand, is that they're kind of counter to AIPAC.
Well,
IPAC.
I don't know that they would characterize themselves as counter to AIPAC.
Maybe not the Jews, because Mearsheimer and Walt are not Jewish.
Right.
But they're at Harvard and Chicago, which is
right.
They're in constant dialogue with a lot of Jewish.
Right. And I don't know, in terms of the motivations behind the Iraq War being related to that. I personally don't know whether that's true or not. But I would say I did spend time with AIPAC. I talked with the AIPAC representative from Chicago when I started running for Congress. I spent quite a bit of time with J Street when I was in Washington not that long ago. And, both groups have good points. And I don't want to act like I'm siding with one or the other. I will say that J Street agrees with the position that I take and the position that my wife takes, that the illegal settlements are detrimental to the Israeli people. They're detrimental to the peace process. They're not just harmful to the Palestinians who are losing their land and homes and olive trees and everything else. They are detrimental to the Israelis themselves.
Do you think, because there is a divide historically between, let's say, the Puritan branch and the Catholic branch, okay? And I mean, because this is the Schofield Reference Bible, and some people argue it's the most influential book of the 20th century, because these notes basically say that if you bless the Jews, you'll be blessed, and if you curse the Jews, you'll be cursed, and that land belongs to the Jews. So a lot of Christians believe
right.
the land can't be divided. That belongs to them.
Okay.
So they have a right to it, but it's kind of a rigid position.
Right. Well, that's an example of one of the failures of diplomacy and the so-called peace processes that have occurred over the last decade since the end of World War II, when Israel was created. You know, we have dealt with it as a geopolitical issue. We have not dealt with it in its theological dimensions.
Which everybody, I mean, most everybody is a religious.
It's so much about theology. It's so much about a sense of right to land. It's so much about, you know, people's sense of what's right and wrong, or what is sanctioned by a holy book or not. And that's why we really do need to address some of those, you know, those theological challenges. And certainly when I was in Jerusalem, we supported a group. We provided financial support to a group of rabbis who were heavy advocates for trying to reduce the amount of incitement within the Jewish community. We created a different project where we worked with both Jews and Palestinians, equal number of Jews, Christians and Muslims, equal number of women and men, to try to counteract religious incitement. There's a huge problem, incitement, both at an official level and at what would be called the track 2 level. People who are respected, who will start propagating a certain kind of ideology that is very destructive to the peace process, which harms everybody, that needs to be addressed. And the only way you can address that kind of incitement is if a co-religionist responds.
Right.
And they engage in a theological discussion, what theologians would call hermeneutic variability.
Right. In other words, hermeneutic meaning how do you interpret the scripture? In other words,
right.
you sit down there, you sit down and say, let's look at this.
Right. Right.
What has our church taught in the past?
Right.
What does the scripture say? Right. I mean,
right.
You actually have to get down to that level if you're going to.
That's right. And over all these decades, and I'm not saying it's been totally ignored, but the emphasis has been on let's draw the maps this way, do these water rights, you know, and then let's give these people this. And it's kind of like a big, you know, it's geopolitical without any theological, without some of the core issues associated to the problem over there. And
do you think Jimmy Carter, he wrote that book, do you think he was moving in that direction with his book, or? You know, that book was very, very controversial. I don't want to question his motives. I don't agree that the South Africa experience is a good analogy for Israel. I mean, the South Africans went to South Africa because they were looking for opportunity. I'm talking about the non-African South Africans. Whereas the Jewish people, many of them anyway, went to Israel because they had been persecuted, or they were fleeing because they were afraid that they were slaughtered in Europe. And that's not just during the time of Hitler and Mussolini. It was way before that. I mean, in Russia, I mean, there's even a special word for it called pogroms. Mm-hmm. I mean, how sad is that? A group of people who, over history, has been singled out. So those people went to Israel because they've been harmed and persecuted against. That's very different than South Africa. Right. So you're saying deeper than where Carter was going at. We definitely have to look at the theological level.
Right.
Because that's where most people really live.
Right. Right.
I mean, the bottom line, you used to say, well, what church do you go to? You know, what do you believe? That's how people used to identify each other. Right. And we're going to have to go back to that and sit down and go to a deeper level.
And the mistake that I think people make is that they think that, you know, for instance, a Christian ought to be the one who confronts or a Jew ought to be the one who confronts a Muslim. Well, that isn't the case. You need a Christian, if a Christian is doing incitement, you need another Christian to engage in theological dialogue.
Right, because he's not going to listen.
He's not going to listen.
He's coming from his belief system.
Right.
He's coming from those scriptures.
It's got to be a co-religionist to deal with it. That's right. And, you know, we ran a project to do that and supported a group of rabbis who was involved with that. So to label me a terrorist is insulting. It's almost libelous. I guess it could be libelous. And I find it really disappointing that people who are supporting Congresswoman Walarski are propagating these misleading items so as to benefit Congresswoman Walarski.
We mentioned before the show, but Tufts University, which is right kind of near Harvard, I mean, it's kind of like the first international school, but this professor there, Michael Glennon, is saying we have to go deeper than just, because people voted for President Obama with the hope for change, you know, and he's getting all kinds of criticism that didn't come to pass. And Glennon is pointing out our system is such that we're being run by a client, he calls it a concealed institutions or a double government. And let me just read his final paragraph, because apparently he's, we mentioned it before, but he was legal counsel to the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, consultant to various congressional committees, as well as to the State Department. So he's very knowledgeable. He says the ultimate problem is the pervasive political ignorance on the part of the American people. Difference to the threat that is emerging from these concealed institutions. That is where the energy for reform has to come from, the American people, not from government. Government is very much the problem here. The people have to take the bull by the horns. And that's a very difficult thing to do, because the ignorance is in many ways rational. There is very little profit to be had in learning about or being active about problems that you can't affect, policies that you can't change. So if you got elected, I mean, you're not going to be able to do miracles, because you're dealing with a big entity here. I mean, is that even, can you relate to that, or I mean, or is that?
You know, it's hard for me. I guess when I heard you say that ignorance is rational, it's a hard one for me.
I know, I didn't understand that either, because ignorance is in many ways rational. He's probably saying
he's saying being uninformed is rational because people feel like they can't do anything. So why become informed? And I maybe that's a reasonable argument. I don't think so. I feel like people who are elected are the ones who are able to assert influence over the policymaking process. This individual worked on a congressional staff, and you know, congressional staffers are in a very good position to influence policy on the basis of the research that they do and what they consider to be the best policy. Oftentimes, you know, the different parties, you know, they have different staffers, but the staffers work together to try to come up with something that would be the best policy.
I know Bob was itching to get in here.
Joe doesn't have much time with us, but one thing that's evident is that we've seen over the years and have read over the years that when politicians can't find anything wrong that's of substance, they will always bring up religion. You know, that's because with religion you can poke so many pins in it. You know, you can use that to change people's attitudes. And for me, I see this as a way that the opponent here is just using that just because there is nothing else that she can find there. You know.
Well, thank you. You know, Bob. I don't want to be judgmental of the, you know, the people who have been propagating these lies, but I will say this: they are lies. And let me give you an example. Another one of the attacks on me is that I gave a scholarship to a taxi driver's son. I took a taxi from the checkpoint in Jerusalem to Bethlehem University, and the man who was driving me, he asked me, "Okay, who are you?" I was on the faculty at Notre Dame at the time, and I said, "I'm Joe Bock, and I'm going to Bethlehem University. Could you give me a ride there?" So we were driving over, he said, "My son is very bright. I wish he could go to university. Could you help us?" So, you know, I spoke with him and said, "Look, I'll consider it." And I met his son later on, and My wife and I decided to pay for the first year of his university education. And the Bethlehem University did not have an engineering program. And he tested, he went and decided he wanted to major, and he decided he wanted to do engineering. So he transferred over to Al-Quds University, which is in Jerusalem. And so we provided the scholarship there. And Al-Quds University has my name listed under a scholarship. Well, we only provided this support for this student for a one-year period. Well, Al-Quds University has had a speaker there who spoke, how can I say it?
Right.
I don't know if it was in support of, but certainly was affiliated with Hamas. That was, and let me just point out, that was after we had given the scholarship, number one, and to infer that I'm a terrorist. Because I helped, wait a second, please. Because I helped a young man who wanted to go to school to start his college out, the son of a taxi driver who had hardly any money. And to infer that I'm a terrorist because of that is inexcusable and
Right, probably in Britain they couldn't get away with it because their libel laws are tighter. But it says here, Joe Bock, this is the rabbi's blog. Joe Bock has a history of supporting pro-Palestinian, anti-Israel institutions, including Al-Quds University, Caritas Internationalis, and the UN's Division for Palestinian Rights. So they are
here's
hitting you like...
Here's another example. Caritas Internationalis, I was on a working group for reconciliation. Caritas Internationalis is part of the Vatican. We had our meetings in the Vatican. So to say that Caritas Internationalis is an anti-Semitic group is like saying the Catholic Church is an anti-Semitic group.
Right. I mean, it's even back, when I was at Notre Dame in the 70s, at that time I was more following the Schofield thing. And I remember at the Social Concerns building near the library there, they were very pro-Palestinian, and I thought, they're just off base. But I didn't understand.
That's the thing. I mean, the thing that's really sad about this is that, whatever I did while I was in Jerusalem, I tried always to make sure everybody looked at both sides. And that was one of the reasons that I decided that I wanted to teach at Hebrew University. I wanted to understand the position of the Israelis. How do they feel? How does all of this, how do the Israeli soldiers, 18-year-olds with M16s at checkpoints, how do they feel about it? I know, and how does the Palestinian trying to get through a checkpoint so that he can make it to work in time feel about it? I want to understand both sides. And that's one of the reasons that I believe that people should elect me to get into Congress, because I have the ability to go in there and add a dimension to the deliberations on something like the Foreign Affairs Committee as somebody who has seen it from all those angles.
Which I don't think we have exactly. I think people come in with their theology sometimes.
Right.
And first of all, if the theology is wrong, we're in big trouble.
Or they go on a short trip over to Israel and come back with a certain viewpoint. And that's good to have some experience over there, but that's not the same as 3 years.
No, because the teacher I had in 8th grade always said, a little bit of knowledge, I forgot the phrase, but
it's a dangerous thing.
It's a dangerous thing, right.
Yeah. We have a few minutes just before the break, so what would you want the voters to remember as they go out and vote on Tuesday?
Well, it's like I've said. I mean, I'm a former humanitarian worker. I have very little. I have had very little time in politics now. I've been back in it for roughly a year, and I never expected to get back involved in politics again. The votes that Congresswoman Walarski attacks me on are, and they're blown out of proportion. She's misleading the public with them, and those votes were taken over 22 years ago. And right now, what people need to understand is that Congresswoman Walarski makes her policy decisions based on ideology, or pressure from special interests. And I believe that what people need, rather than ideology, is people who will make decisions based on what works. And rather than making decisions on special interests, will make decisions on our interests. Our government is broken, and we've got to send people in there to fix it. Congresswoman Walarski is part of the problem. Part of the problem of the obstruction in Congress to where you can't hardly get anything done. And I'm not saying she's a bad person at all.
No, I mean,
I have respect for anybody who has the guts to run for office. But I am saying that we can do better, and we should do better. And that's why I'm running.
okay. And I know you got to get going. Now, today is the 22nd. The election is what, the
November
4th?
November 4th.
Tuesday.
4th, right. So they'll probably air this.
Okay.
Hopefully they'll air it a lot or whatever. And, the Lord's will be done. I mean,
Yeah. The Lord's will be done. I agree.
There's the verse, the scripture verse, says, first of all, before all things, offer up prayers and supplications, intercessions for everybody and for kings and those in authority. I mean, we have a huge duty to pray for those because the scripture emphasizes that the powers that be are ordained of God. I mean, so you have to respect the people in authority. A lot of people didn't like Bush, and now a lot of people don't like Obama, but you have to be careful when you're thinking about God that don't be speaking evil of the ruler of the people without being aware. St. Paul said don't do it.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, sometimes there's a lack of respect. And I think we have to emphasize that. Okay, well, we're going to cut the show now. And,
Okay.
may the Lord
Very
bless.
good.
Yep.
Thank you very much, Peter. Bob, good to see you. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Yep.
All
Yep.
right. Okay. Let's see.
Okay, we're on our second half of the show. Just some thoughts. Unfortunately, we couldn't get Jackie Walarski, or it was too quick of a notice, and somebody from her team in, because I have friends that are really supporting Jackie, and I have friends that are really supporting Joe. And like we said at the meeting this morning, I kind of try to stay more on the theological, but I mean, obviously this is the Middle East situation, to me, strong theological.
Right. Yes, the Middle East has a strong theological tie to everyone, just because all of the major religions in the world has some tie to the Middle East. Whether you are Catholic, Muslim, or Hebrew, there, they all have their source there, and so how a person feels about their religion, often it is often that defines them, and then when things get tough, that's what they will act on,
I'm not that anxious about, because Joe has a Catholic background. That means she's kind of historically connected. I mean, Middle East goes way back, and the Catholic Church goes way back.
Right.
So it doesn't hurt to have somebody that understands the whole historical.
Right.
But Jackie has strong feelings about it too.
Oh yeah, and it's a person who has to understand both sides, meaning that Abraham is called the father of faith, but then Abraham is also a father to the people of Islam too. He is he's buried on like in their part of the city, there, and also if you read the book of Genesis there, later in his life, he had other kids, which were not of the Hebrew faith, there. So here's a man who stands in both worlds, and then, was he wrong for it? No. Was he right for it? Some people would say he was wrong,
Well, one of the problems is, because I have the show Israel, is that most of the Jews. In fact, I just heard a preacher who was Jewish who converted, became a pastor.
Yeah.
He says most of the Jews in Israel are atheists, and I used to hear that all the time in church. But usually, when you think of a Christian, you think he's religious.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can't be a Christian and an atheist.
Right.
But
right.
the Jews it's a cultural thing.
Right.
Oftentimes more than just, and so.
Yeah, and the Jews and the Islamists have more in common than they do have as far as differences go. Their diet is the same.
Well, I think historically they got along fairly well in the past.
Right.
I don't think they were,
Right.
So this is kind of a new thing
Yeah.
that we're looking at.
Right.
Now, we're going to try to switch gears here
Right.
because we weren't planning on this. We were planning on discussing our trip that several of us took.
Right. Yes. On our trip, we started out on October 10th, going to Battle Creek, Michigan, visiting a station there called Access Vision. And after we left Battle Creek, we went to Kalamazoo to visit Public Media Network. And we left Kalamazoo going to Wyoming, Michigan, which is outside of Grand Rapids. And we visited WKTV. And after we left there, we went to Grand Rapids, where we visited Grand Rapids Community Media Center, such that there were 4 separate public access TV studios that we visited. Each of them were well run. One rented space. The others, I'm sorry, one owned their space.
Right.
The other three rented their space, and the one that owned their space said he wished he would have rented the space, But visiting those different media outlets, for me, I was able to see how public access operated in 4 different cities. There were some differences, but basically they were they function the same. The equipment that they had, they owned it. They also had equipment to lease out or to rent out to other producers of TV shows, which is something we don't have here, but it's something that the St. Joe Public Library has done. They have equipment that can be rented there.
Now, don't forget the place. They offered 2 cameras.
Right.
And you nudged me because I didn't know what to say because they were offering us 2 cameras.
Right.
And so the Fort Wayne fella took it.
Yes.
And then you nudged me, and I went and talked to him, and he said, basically I said, well, I think we need it more than you.
Yes.
And so they're going to give them to us,
Yeah.
and we still have to go up to Wyoming and get them.
Right. Yeah, and having your own just equipment in your own space, you can tape your shows when you're ready, and also another difference was that there were more than one station located at each place. The public have adapted to the stations, meaning that one station in each city was dedicated to showing government shows, city council meetings, and the politicians then are able to get their views out, and it is not done in a adversarial way. They're very cordial to each other, but they get their point across, and also the public can then easily just respond to them when they see them on the streets, and also it helps to make the government run better. Feedback is given to the people making the decisions, and that's something that I would like to see done in South Bend.
Right. So what do they say? It's a well-oiled machine.
Right.
It creates a community that's a little more interactive.
Right. People are interactive. They are not afraid to talk. They can get on their phone. They can call their local councilman. The councilman can call them. Also, it cuts down on the friction that can start there when one party doesn't really understand what the other party has said, meaning the city council meetings, since they are televised, people can hear what's said,
And I think some of those were live.
Right, live shows,
And common in all of them that was the most watched.
Right.
So it wasn't boring, apparently. I mean,
Right.
it wasn't whatever the local high school event
right.
was. The council meeting was more watched.
Right, the council meetings were the most watched shows. Second were the religious shows, and third were the high school sports games, such as the football games. They would televise,
Right. So if Adams was playing Washington or whatever.
Right. They would take their truck, go out there, and actually film the game, and to have a vehicle to be used for remote filming. That's something that hopefully in the future we can get. We can send the truck out there to visit the Washington Adams game. We can send the truck out to do the volleyball game here too. So
right. Or I mean, the sky's the limit because
Right,
whatever
right.
your interest. I mean, let's say high school debates.
Right.
See, sometimes high school is boring, right? They're not really.
Right.
They're not doing anything intellectual per se, but you could film
Right.
a debate. And
Yeah. And the equipment they had, 3 of the stations had remote cameras, not the large cameras, but the very small cameras. Well, the very small, high definition cameras.
right, because the one they loan to us are not high definition.
No. They are.
The ones they're giving us.
Yes, they are similar. We have here.
Right.
Yeah.
So, but it was sponsored by Alicia, and she's from Ann Arbor.
Yes.
And Ann Arbor was talking to Kara Kelly, or the deputy mayor. Remember you introduced me to?
Right.
He said Ann Arbor is a model. It's a city that South Bend's modeling on because I think the population's very similar, and so one
Same.
university town.
University town, meaning Ann Arbor has the University of Michigan there. It's a major employer. It's a football power. South Bend has Notre Dame, major employer and a football power.
It's got a great law school. I mean,
Great law school. They're very similar, and the hospitals are similar too.
No, I want
Yes.
to because they have 10 full-time employee
Yes.
at their station,
Right.
public access station.
Right.
and 10 part-time.
Part-time.
So 10 full-time, that's 20 people
Right.
that the city
Right.
employs
Yes.
to have so that
Yes.
their citizens
Yes.
have this.
Yes. And it's a great way for the city just to get their message out to the public, you know. Oftentimes a city has to spend thousands of dollars just to have people to talk to the activists in the city to say, you know, what about these TIF funds here, you know? Have you thought of a better way to use those? What about sponsoring the Silverhawks, you know? Like a city had things going on, and a mayor and a city council has to communicate those needs, you know. Having that public access, that's their major way of communicating those needs and having people on the different shows just to give feedback, you know, such that once that legislation comes up for a vote, all of the difficult questions have been answered, you know.
Right, right. And that's where public access, because, you know, the FCC 1970 said this is especially good for urban areas.
Yes.
And they pointed out that the mega corporations, as far as informing people about reality, could end up controlling it all.
Yes. You know.
And especially like the religious, the Christian discourse
Right.
gets pushed off to the side.
Right. That gets back to this this description of the concealed
Institutions.
institutions.
Right, and this
Right.
is coming from Tufts University, which is kind of sister school to Harvard of some sorts.
Right. Yeah. You have institutions out there that need legislation passed in order that they can expand or either find a loophole to get out of something. And these institutions, how they normally do it is to have lobbyists. Now, lobbyists aren't limited to Washington, D.C. You have people from the various business communities being city council for passage of legislation. How many times have the question come up, should we give tax abatement to a certain company there? Now that company has sent someone here just to wine and dine people, just to tell them, you need to see our view. This is how this is going to help you. Now, if public access was there for government to use, and it is, you know, there, that would be one way that could be done, and all parties could have their views seen and heard.
Yeah, I just think, you know, the word community, you have to assume that the word commune is related to the word community. And a healthy community is one that's interacting.
Right.
It's like a marriage, right? There's good communication.
Right. And you're going to have some bad spots, you know, and then as long as the lines of communication are open, you can work through them, you know. One of the issues we have in South Bend is that the bad spots created over the police tapes, you know, there, you know, that's still a bad spot, you know. The communication that has gone out over that has not been clear, you know. It's still muddied, you know, there, and such that if there was a process, if the people were willing to publicly view their views on public access, everyone could hear it. They're able to rebut those views. They could have it all settled in one show.
Right. I mean, I don't know. How big was the town you grew up in when you were growing up? Was it small?
It was about 3 times the size of South Bend.
Well, you're big. Okay, you're big. Okay, I'm a small town. So, if everybody lives right there,
Yeah.
then you don't need public access
Yeah.
that much. I mean, because you're going to be seeing each other.
Right, right,
But in a bigger town,
right,
how are you going to connect?
right. In a bigger town, we had public access. Public access was used by the government agencies there. There were years in which the funding was low, but the city and county government kept that public access channel going. And the city grew basically due to information getting out and also having people to respond and having someone there to answer their questions, and they got things settled out in the open, and
At the meeting, one of the guys, I don't know which city it was from. Let me see. You had the Fort Wayne people that
Right.
were there. You had the guy from Cincinnati working for the government in
Right.
Cincinnati. He was up for the tour.
Yes,
But they were saying they were putting 30-second, 60-minute spots on to promote their town.
yes,
Okay? In other words,
right,
the public access place itself was
Yeah.
saying, like you could say, hey, you ought to come to South Bend.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
it doesn't have to just be, we're trying to find out who's evil in the government,
right, right,
right? We're
right,
trying to find corruption,
right,
which is,
Right.
but at the same time,
it's a communication tool, and it's a tool to give the little guy on the street a place in which he can speak up and have his needs heard by those government officials who are very high up or those who are in the bureaucratic area there, which is oftentimes where the problem lies, there, because when you have long-term city and county employees, oftentimes they create their own de facto policies, whereas the elected person says, I'm for this and that, and they want to do good, but they take their application to one of the bureaucrats there, and things don't happen, there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a means of getting to the root cause of that too.
what Joe was saying applies to us, because in other words, he's having to live right
Yes.
there in Jerusalem and
Yeah.
try to bring some kind of reconciliation.
Right,
But he said you have to bring a co-religionist to the
Right.
table for another
Right.
religionist. Okay,
Right.
There's a parallel here, right?
Yes,
I mean,
yes.
there's something.
right. Yes, someone from the local government in St. Joe County and the city of South Bend has to be an advocate for public access. They've got to be able to speak. Now, we went to 4 cities which public access was very prominent in those cities turning around. Grand Rapids, for instance, now is the largest city in Michigan, and they have 3 public access channels. There, 3 of them, not just one. And they're all going 24 hours a day. And so oftentimes people in small towns just don't get the benefit of the knowledge that the other people have, not unless they actually go and visit, And so for me personally, I was happy to go, happy to visit, happy to see the equipment, see the studios, look at their programming schedule, and also to look at their policies for the people having shows, what they can and can't say, there, and also how to to police these shows too.
Right. Now, I called Alicia before this, and I said, Alicia, maybe we can film this. And
Yes.
Fort Wayne
Yeah.
had Otto,
Right.
whose dad had him when his dad was 62. We got
Yeah.
afterwards. We had a long time to fellowship, but he filmed it, and Mike Seneke, who was also with us,
Right.
we're working on getting that on the server, and then
server,
we're going
right.
to edit it, and we're going to put it on the air,
Right,
so
right.
people can actually see what we saw.
Right. Yeah, and I know that it will be of benefit for the South Bend area to see it. Anything that will help a community is good.
Yeah, I think somebody said that the most watched show in a local community is the local news.
Right.
So everybody doesn't want just whatever the 6 mega corporations are
Right.
producing for
Right.
us.
Right.
They do want
Yeah.
to be in touch with on the ground where they live locally.
Right. And in these local news shows, as you mentioned, they do have that mega corporation flavor to some of them. People who live in the area want to know what is going on just around them. They aren't. They're concerned about things that's happening in the world, but they will. How did my high school team do? There. Is it going to rain tomorrow? Are the farmers going to have a good season this year? What's on the city council's agenda there? How is the traffic going to affect me? Like, they want to know what's going on in the local area, not so much a canned spiel.
No, or it could be a religious issue.
Right.
I mean, your friend goes to this church, you go to this church. What's
Right.
the issue?
Right.
And here you can sit down. Okay.
Yeah.
Here's the issue on
Oh, yeah.
really important matters, because
Right.
we're going
Oh,
to
yeah.
die.
Oh yeah, and also one church could have a clothing drive, a drive to collect clothes, another church when the same thing. Why couldn't the two churches work together,
And
if
they can use this,
knew
right?
this,
Right. And the nonprofits,
Right.
a lot of the nonprofit organizations
Yes.
were urged to use it to promote
Right.
their nonprofit cause.
Right. And then South Bend has more nonprofits per capita there than any state, than any city within Indiana, here.
Right, and they really pushed encouraging nonprofit organizations
Right.
to use public access
Yes.
to promote your
Yes.
nonprofit cause.
Right.
So we have 1 minute,
Yep.
and so we're going forward with Public
Right.
Access Michiana,
Yeah.
and I think anybody that watches this, the key is you have to talk to your city council, county council representative, because without them backing public access, it just isn't going to. It's not going to happen, because that money has to come through that franchise, through their authority. So we always encourage you to talk to your representative to keep public access alive here in South Bend. So until next time, Public Access Michiana.